This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Danny Torres joins me now. Danny's a freelance sports journalist and the host of the Talkin 21 podcast, a podcast dedicated to the legacy of Roberto Clemente. Danny, welcome to the Subway to Shea podcast. How are you, my friend?
Oh my God, what an intro, man. I think you have to start doing intros for Talking 21, Anthony. Thank you so very much for the invitation.
Absolutely. Don't tap me with a good time. You know where to reach me, and I would love to do that for you. Let's get into it, right? Because your podcast focuses on the career of Roberto Clemente, and I know this is a Mets podcast, but there are some links to Roberto Clemente and the Mets, and we're going to get into that in this episode, this very special bonus episode for everyone out there. We are coming up on the anniversary of the tragic passing of Roberto Clemente, who passed away in a plane crash on New Year's Eve of 1972. Clemente was on his way from Puerto Rico to Nicaragua to deliver goods, relief supplies to earthquake victims when his plane went down shortly after takeoff. Clemente had an amazing career that got cut short. 15-time All-Star, 12-time Gold Glover, 4-time batting champion, MVP in 1966, 2-time world champion in 1960 and 1971, and a World Series MVP in 1971 as well. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1973, the first Latin American player to be elected. Danny, you wrote an article for the Hall of Fame, which we're going to get into, dive a little deeper into shortly. But what really sticks out to me the first few paragraphs that you wrote, your childhood memory on New Year's Day of 1973, the day after we lost Roberto. You said you never really got to see him play, but you remember seeing your dad cry reading the newspaper of his passing. How much did Roberto Clemente mean to your father and baseball fans back then?
Well, Anthony, the one thing that I've always shared, whether on a podcast or in a piece that I happen to write where those want to know my connection to the great one, to Roberto Clemente, I could just say point blank, I know for a fact, because I've heard this story from my brother Jose, where he said when Roberto Clemente, when it was announced that he was going to be the World Series MVP in 1971, when the Pirates defeated the Baltimore Orioles, when Clemente is speaking with Bob Prince and asked Bob, who actually was a very dear friend of Clemente, he said, "Can I have a few minutes to speak in Spanish?" And he speaks in Spanish, and my brother tells me that he can recall vividly seeing my father cry. So my father comes from Puerto Rico in the 1950s, literally 20 years later, to hear someone speak in Spanish, his native tongue, 20 years later to witness on TV in a national broadcast on NBC, someone speaking in Spanish and thanking and asking for the blessings from his parents. That speaks volumes to who Clemente was, all the accolades, but one of the reasons why Clemente decided on New Year's Eve to take that mission, that humanitarian mission to Nicaragua that unfortunately we all know what happened that particular evening.
It's interesting. Roberto Clemente played his entire 18-year career for the Pittsburgh Pirates. But like we said, he still has some ties to New York Mets history. He had a .319 batting average with 209 hits, 11 homers, 84 RBIs, and 110 runs scored in 170 games just versus the Mets for his entire career. I got that stat from a Stat Muse. On September 24th, 1971, Clemente was honored at Shea Stadium not only for his play, but for his work, like we mentioned, for being a great humanitarian. You eloquently wrote about it in your article for the National Baseball Hall of Fame, which I will link in the description of this podcast so that everyone can read it. And I did get some pictures here. This is the Clemente pin that you had had posted in the article that was given out to the fans, and I was able to find. There it is.
Yeah, have it right there. Have it right here.
That's awesome. And then there was a picture from, I think it was Jack Canfield from the AP of Roberto Clemente with his wife driving a car around Shea Stadium.
Yeah.
Uh,
Cadillac Eldorado convertible.
Beautiful. That is an absolute beautiful car. The pregame ceremony, which included his family, Puerto Rican civic and community leaders from the New York area, and the weekend was kind of dubbed superstar Roberto Clemente, and he really was that. He really was a superstar. Can you say, real life, superhero on and off the field for many fans. Roberto's work as a humanitarian was just as important to him as his playing career, right, Danny?
I would say if you had to ask Roberto what meant more was giving back. Yes, baseball provided an unbelievable livelihood. At that time was being paid. I think in his final season, he made $150,000. But from everything that I was able to gather, having an opportunity to become good friends with his teammates, players such as Manny Sanguian, Dave Cash, Al Oliver, the late Doc Ellis. I could literally do an entire podcast on my 5 years of becoming dear friends with Doc Ellis. And the one thing that you got an opportunity to see, Roberto, how he embraced especially children, conducting clinics. Just yesterday, December 27th, was a clinic that he decided before taking that trip to Nicaragua, that he was doing numerous clinics throughout the island. But this one particular clinic in the city of Aguadilla in Puerto Rico, there were close to 300 children. And last year, I actually had an opportunity to interview a former Pittsburgh Pirate, Fernando Gonzalez, who was actually there and basically was able to provide his insight, his recollections of being there. But that's the one thing that more and more throughout my years of writing on Roberto Clemente is not only what we talk about now and have basically dubbed Clemente humanitarian, but just continuing to want to give back to the less fortunate, especially children.
And it ended up setting up the Roberto Clemente Award, which we are going to get into. That's been, handed out every year since since his passing,
Yes.
basically. Roberto's ties to the Mets history only continued as on September 30th, 1972 at Three Rivers Stadium in Pittsburgh, he hit his 3,000th and final hit of his career off of who would soon become the Rookie of the Year that season, John Matlack of the New York Mets. You got to interview John and his son Danny for the Talkin 21 podcast. What did you take away from that conversation with John, who was, part of such an important historical moment for not only Roberto Clemente, but just baseball in general?
You know what I told John, and I've known now John literally almost close to 20 years. So talking about the 3,000th hit, it's almost like been there, done that. And that's not a part of what we talk about, because I have to, in all honesty, say that John Matlack has become a very close friend. When my mother passed away, I received a condolence card from the Matlack family. His son, Danny, we become very, very good friends. He lives in New Jersey. But the one thing that when we actually did talk about it, when it was the 40th anniversary of that memorable historic hit at Three Rivers Stadium. And again, it's interesting that you continue to mention the connections between the Mets and the Pittsburgh Pirates, because there's something else that I wanted to bring into this podcast, something I thought was rather interesting. But one of the things was John did not know that was the 3,000th hit. He's standing on the pitcher's mound, turns around and see Clemente tips his cap, and he's just, wondering what this is all about, and finds out that it actually was the 3,000th hit. The other thing is, you mentioned with regards to being the Rookie of the Year, his, his trajectory as a New York Met, and he's, and rightfully so, in the Mets Hall of Fame. But I think the one thing that I took away also was Matlack John having the opportunity to visit Clemente when John played in the Puerto Rican Winter League, and Roberto invited John and a couple of other of the players over to his home. And the one thing that he talked about was how Clemente took his particular bat, a U1 model, and there's some weight to that bat. I've had the opportunity to hold Clemente's bat, try to swing that bat, And you could just imagine someone with the quick wrists and the strength that Clemente used his body to swing and connect for that 3,000 feet. But John said, Danny, he picked up the bat as if it was a toothpick, just the way he handled the bat in his hand. But John didn't have opportunity to see the quote unquote humanitarian side, but certainly knew that not only Clemente, but that entire Pittsburgh lineup with Al Oliver, Manny Sanguian, Dave Cash, you name the players, Willie Stargell, Pops, they were called the Lumber Company. And there was a reason, because they all swung a bat similar to that U1 model. But when it came to connecting to whatever was thrown, more than likely there was going to be a hit or a homer, simply because I'll tell you this, something about with the Pirates and the Mets, their history. The visiting player that hit the most homers at Shea Stadium was Willie Stargell. So we could talk about Chipper Jones so many years later, but the one player that hit the most homers at Shea Stadium was a Pittsburgh Pirate named Willie Stargell.
And I just love that, how this interweaves the Pirates and Mets history, with Roberto Clemente and, everything that, surrounds, the Mets as well as their history. And we talked about the humanitarian aspect of his life, originally named the Commissioner's Award starting back in 1971, and then was officially changed in 1973 to the Roberto Clemente Award, which is an award for, maybe there are people who don't know, award given annually to a player who demonstrates the values of Hall of Famer Roberto Clemente, displayed in his commitment to community and understanding the value of helping others, which, you put, perfectly through our conversation so far. Roberto Clemente Award winners, linking it back to the Mets, they've had 4. Gary Carter in 1989, Al Leiter in 2000, Carlos Delgado in 2006, and Curtis Granderson in 2016. I thought that Carlos Beltran was a part of that. He did win the award, but it was
the St. Louis Cardinals
as a St. Louis Cardinal.
Yep.
Yeah, I know this. Well, before I get to that part, are there any other Mets who were nominated that you thought should have won the award, or maybe they should have been nominated?
I would say hands down, I just wish he would have won the award, is David Wright. That's the one guy, not only that I do have a friendship and relationship with David Wright to this day, but knowing what I saw firsthand, I don't know how many times, countless times, especially just something as simple. And Anthony, you know it, having an opportunity to be on the field prior to the game during batting practice. And how many times that I would see David Wright walk over, sign a baseball, sign a jersey, sign a cap, take a picture, whether it was stuff that he was doing in the community in New York City or in Virginia. But that's the one thing that I have to say that I wish he was nominated for the award, but I just wish that he would have been the one Met that would have won the Roberto Clemente Award. And I could tell you right now, Anthony, I certainly hope that Pete Alonso, the polar bear, will one day be wearing a Met cap, wearing a Met jersey, continuing to break records. You see, I'm promoting Pete Alonso right now, but I definitely would love to see Pete Alonso win the Roberto Clemente Award, because I could tell you right now, that man is so deserving.
Yeah, I got to meet David Wright. It was basically just in the parking lot as a Mets fan, and around 2005, it just started. It was his official rookie year. It came up in 2004, played, half the season, but 2005, was his official kind of rookie season. And he could not have been more of a nice guy. I literally, there were some players, I won't mention names, that would not, sign for the fans and all that stuff. David Wright literally, and this was when there was the parking lot surrounded by, the gates, and you would have to come out and there was the barricades. He came out, took pictures, signed with every fan. You cannot talk about a nicer guy in David Wright. And like you said, carried on throughout his entire career.